Okay, this video is gonna be very different from my other videos because I use this YouTube summarizer thing um, to get the points and the important notes and everything. Right now, I'm gonna be doing a reading, like I ask Cloud to prepare a document, um, more of HTML website for me about promoter family risk map and the resilience architecture. It's a 38,000 word document, website, whatever. And I'm gonna read through that. Now, instead of highlighting all the points and then having to remember all those points, I'm just gonna talk with you when I want and make a note of that. And then later on, when I get the transcript of this entire video, then I'll know exactly what is what. I think it's like a lazy but still smart approach. So I'd say let's get into it. I think it might take a while for this video though. It might be one of the longest ones so far. The interesting part is this vape. It says it's at 0% of you know the liquid inside, but I've been vaping it for the last 3 days still. Let's see if it runs out in this video. So there are 80 scenarios, 10 stress tests, and 12 benchmark failures, and the small number of decisions that actually determine whether a family survives a bad year, the promoter family that we are referring to in this case. So we are going to be looking at 6 categories: legal protection, financial resilience, corporate resilience, physical protection, international diversification, and illegal evasion and concealment. The line between the first five and the six is almost never about the structure. It's about timing, disclosure, and purpose. Timing is the single most important variable in this entire architecture, and the calibration for this is specific for, well, me and my family. Here, we are going to take a legal baseline as of August 2026. And there have been 3 major shifts in the last 18 months which can change this analysis. So, if someone is working with a 2024 template, then it's stale law, so it has to be updated. The first important thing is the Income Tax Act 2025, Act number 30 of 2025 is in force now. It has replaced the Income Tax Act from 1961 with effect from 1st April 2026. So it's already in effect right now. Okay, the practical consequence is every section reference in older family office documents, trust deeds, wills, and advisor letters is now potentially wrong. So, section numbers of a trust, taxation, representative, assesses, clubbing, and transfers void against tax dues have all moved. We need to verify this, but if they're citing 1961 Act sections, then the CA needs to map it out and update it. There is also a new concept of virtual digital space where there are email servers, social media accounts, online trading accounts, and digital asset storage. which are expressively searchable during the seizure proceedings, which is directly relevant for this part V2G. The second is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Act of 2026, Act number 6 of 2026. It was received assent on 6th April 2026. So this is the single most important legal development for a promoter who has signed personal guarantees. In our case, we have not signed any personal guarantees, so I don't think this applies to us anymore. So personal guarantee in 2026 is a materially more dangerous instrument than it was in 2024. This drives the single highest priority action in Part X. The third thing is SEBI has tightened both the SME regime and the exit ramp from it. So SEBI's amendment regulations 2025 codified an EBITDA based profitability test and structural changes. Minimum promoter contribution is 20% locked in for 3 years with excess released in phased manner. And for migrations, it's in Regulation 277 of SEBI, ICDR regulations. So obtaining shareholder approval, they can migrate to main board by a special resolution, and the resolution carries an unusual test where the votes can be placed by non-promoter shareholders in favor and must be at least twice the non-promoter votes cast against. The promoter control of the register does not carry it. BSE requires an average EBITDA of 15 crores over the preceding 3 financial years and 1000 public shareholders under its revised framework, effective 11th August 2025. Okay, so the part 1 is what we are protecting. All of this was not part 1, it was just about how to read the document. Part 1 is why net worth is the wrong protected object. Net worth is a scalar, SCALAR. It is a single number produced by netting heterogeneous things against each other. That netting operation destroys exactly the information you need in a crisis. So there are 4 specific failures. The first one is net worth assumes fungibility that does not exist. 200 crores of promoter shareholding and 200 crores of cash are the same number in completely different assets. One is saleable in a week, the other is locked in ICDR lock-in by SAST, creeping acquisition ceilings, by insider trading windows, by SME platform illiquidity, and most importantly by the fact that selling is the thing you're trying to avoid. In the crisis when you need money the most, the shares are worth least and the least saleable. A concentrated promoter's net worth is the highest precisely when he least needs it, and lowest precisely when he most needs it. Net worth is silent on correlation. A family with 500 crores in one listed company and family with 500 crores spread across five uncorrelated assets have identical net worth and utterly different survivability. Net worth is silent on control. You can lose control of the company while your net worth still rises. Wealth and control are separate objects protected by separate mechanisms. Net worth is silent on everything that isn't money. A promoter in custody has unchanged net worth. So does a promoter whose daughter is being stalked, whose son is in a contested divorce, whose passport is subject to lookout circular, whose brother has stopped speaking to him. Every one of these catastrophic outcome, none of them registers. The correct protected object is not a number. It is a portfolio of 16 distinct capabilities, each with its own each with its own failure modes, its own protective mechanism, and critically, its own independent requirement from the others. So, the 16 protected objects that we have in focus are life and physical safety, and the primary protective mechanism is threat proportionate security, medical infrastructure, and travel protocols. Can money fix it after the fact? Nope. And the failure over here looks like death or injury of a family member from violence, accident, or medical crisis. The second one is personal liberty, where you need to have clean compliance record, document trail, pre-written criminal counsel. Money can help after partially, slowly, and expensively. Over here, the failure would be custody, arrest, bail refused, and coercive investigation. The third one is family members, where the protective mechanism is individual level security and support, not household level. The fourth is family relationships. Let's say when a sibling stops speaking or parent child rupture, it's important to have a family constitution council forum for disagreement before it is needed. And money usually accelerates the rupture. The fifth is reputation. Governance record, rapid response capability, and conduct discipline. Money can help partially over years. So, sustained association with wrongdoing, that's the failure, true or false. The sixth is personal liquidity, where the failure would look like when one cannot meet living costs, legal fees, or margin calls from accessible funds. So it is important to have tiered emergency liquidity outside the operating company, and it only helps with money if it is built beforehand. Seventh is personal assets, which could in failure get attached, pledged, disputed, or frozen. So it's important to have a clean title, separate ownership, disclosed structures, and no guarantees. Operating business is the eighth one. So it's important to have BCP, insurance, second site, second approval, and diversified customers. The ninth one is promoter shareholding. So it's important to either to lock in discipline, holding company or trust, shareholders agreement, and no pledges. 10th is voting rights or control rights. So it's important to have concentration of voting, which is separate from the economics. The 11th is ability to raise capital. You need to have a track record, governance, signal, relationship depth, and no convenience cars. 12th is international mobility, which is again clean record, long lived residence and visa options. 13th is business continuity, where you're talking about redundancy in site, systems, people, and suppliers. That's your protection. The intellectual property and data, so it's important to have registration, segregation, access control, and exit discipline. 15th is succession across generations, so you need to have wills, trust, family constitution, and groomed and tested successors. And the 16th is quality of life during crisis. So failure would look like children's schools getting disrupted, family relocated, health neglected, marriage strained. So it is important for the primary protective mechanism that there is a pre-agreed crisis protocol, ring-fenced life continues funds. The three properties that make this list useful is property A, independence is the actual objective. The architecture's real job is to ensure that these 16 do not fail together. Property B is some objects are unrecoverable and those dominate. So effectively the things we spoke about before, objects 1, 3, 4, 9, 10, 12 and 15 are effectively one-way doors. And property C is several of these are protected by things that must exist before the event and cannot be created after. A trust settled after a demand notice is voidable. A residence permit applied for after a lookout circular is refused. Insurance bought after the fire is a fraud. The entire value of this document sits in the gap between we should do that and we did that in a quiet year. That is the argument to make the family, and it is only the argument that reliably works. Now let's come to the part 2, the risk universe. First of all, the construction principle. A risk registers built by listing does, I said that wrong. A risk register built by listing bad things is a list. A risk register built by asking through which channel does this family actually get hurt is a map. There are 8 channels and every scenario below is assigned to one. Channel number 1, government and regulations, where the mechanism for harm could be state coercive or fiscal power applied to family or company. Why this family is exposed? Because it's a listed entity, promoter control, high RPT surface, exports, and hazardous process manufacturing. Second channel is corporate, where the operating company's own economics or governance fails. That's a harm. The family is exposed due to concentrated revenue, single site, long cycle contracts, capital goods, and cyclicality. The third channel is family. The fourth is crime and security. The fifth is digital, where there is a loss or manipulation of information in systems. After that, we have reputation. So because the company is listed, that equals to permanent public scrutiny in the Indian media cycle and competitor incentives. Then there is financial or macro, When there is a single asset concentration, INR exposure, or domestic only banking. And the last one is geopolitical, where import dependence on inputs, export markets, and family mobility ambitions are exposed. So, in a family, there is also a risk if there is a family member who becomes a US person or foreign tax resident. Then there is nominee versus legal heir conflict on demat, bank, or insurance. In crime and security, there are the usual kidnap for ransom, extortion, stalking, but one addition is embezzlement by a trusted CFO or family office head. That's a risk. In digital, there is an addition of IP drawing, process theft by departing employee. In financial, there is an addition of insurance failure or under insurance or insurer's insolvency. On top of this, these already are a total of 51 scenarios. On top of that, Cloud has added 29 additions. For Group 1, there is sector specific existential risks that look like operational nuances. The first is loss of utility vendor approval or type certification, where the revenue it can zero a market segment overnight. Then it's technology substitution. Then there is catastrophic field failure, fire, an outage, a fatality at a customer's installation, trade remedy action, BIS regime change on inputs, land title or GIDC lease, single site concentration, contract labor arrangements, and provident fund treatment. Then there is group 2 of governance signals that are themselves the crisis. So, for example, it could include things where the event itself is not the harm, but the market's reading of the event is the harm. For example, when the auditor resigns or there is a qualified opinion. After that, there is an independent director resignation cascade. Then there is RPT controversy. and there is failed migration to the main board. And group 3 has family risks that Indian promoter families systematically undername. The first one is death, second is next generation immigrates permanently, and there is a family member becomes a US or foreign tax resident, then there is promoter health, and there is nominee versus legal heir, where the Supreme Court has confirmed that a nomination does not override the succession law. The nominee holds as trustee for the legal heirs. This has to be verified. I think one important thing over here is if a family trust drafted without knowing that one beneficiary will become a US citizen or a foreign resident, it can create annual compliance costs and penalty exposure out of all proportion to the assets involved. A counsel is needed for this, a US tax specialist, not an Indian CA. It must be addressed before the trust is settled, not after. Group 4 is fiduciary and information risks inside your own perimeter, like embezzlement by the trusted CFO or family office head, IP and drawing theft, and deep fakes and family information leaks, and identity theft via DSC, DIN, or KYC. Then there are structural and macro risks to concentrated Indian promoters, where there is reintroduction of the estate duty. Then there is debanking of the group. This is a correlation risk masquerading as an operational one. And that is why banking relationships should deliberately be plural. And then there is insurance failure, and then there is foreign arbitration award, which is enforceable abroad. It's important to note that once you have foreign assets and foreign contracts, you have created enforceable targets outside India. This is genuine cost of international diversification must be priced in rather than ignored. Then part 3 is scoring the risk universe. So there's a method in why the formula is multiplicative. Over here we do RPS. RPS equals to P into S into V into B into I, where P stands for probability, the range between 1 to 5. The severity is S, V is velocity, B is blindness, and I is irrecoverability. So over here it says that it also means the two cheapest interventions available to you are the two that move the multipliers. First is by detectability, where you can have early warning indicators, monitoring, or disclosure hygiene. And the second one is by recoverability, where there is insurance, liquidity, redundancy, and documentation. You usually cannot change the P. You can always change B and I. And they've given a ranking of the master risk matrix of all 80 scenarios. It's a good one. Filtered by ID, keyword or channel, government, corporate, family, security, digital, reputation, financial, and geopolitical. The highest risk is ED investigation, PMLA or FEMA touching family or counterparty. That can happen sudden. There's not much for me to read out over here apart from reading it. It says that failure of SME to mainboard migration is the least one though. So there are 10 risks which make up 7 clusters, and these 7 clusters deserve immediate attention. The first one is coercive state action, which includes politically motivated action, attachment or freezing, or by extension IT search, and also CBI and EOW. For this, the preventive measure would be annual independent RPT audit by a firm that is not the statutory auditor, testing arm's length pricing and procedure, zero cash policy documented, counterparty screening, sanctions, litigation, adverse media for anyone above a threshold, every intra-group rupee movement documented contemporaneously with a board or committee note, document retention policy that is written, followed and never suspended, Section 90 SBO declarations BEN1 and BEN2 genuinely current, pre-retained white-collar criminal counsel on a nominal annual retainer, the single highest value 2 to 5 lakhs a promoter family can spend. The early warning indicators include summons to the CFO or account staff, unusual queries from the bank's compliance desk, a customer or supplier being raided, notice to the company's bankers, RTI style inquiries, sudden interest from a journalist in a specific transaction, or a former employee filing a whistleblower complaint. For first 24 hours, call retained counsel before anyone speaks. Cluster 2 involves personal guarantee invocation. I don't think this applies to us. but for the sake of saying, I'm gonna read it out. The preventive measures include: build the guarantee registered this month, Part X, Day 1. For every line, lender, borrower, date, amount, whether limited or all monies, whether continuing, whether released, whether spouse is co obligator. Then at every refinancing, negotiate a cap, a stated maximum rather than all monies, automatic release on a convenient test, example debt or EBITDA below a level for 4 consecutive quarters, removal of the spouses as co-obligator in exchange for something else, sunset dates. Banks will resist and will sometimes concede on price, reduce reliance on guarantees by improving standalone credit. This is the underrated argument for mainboard migration and a credit rating. Keep the family residence out of the security package if humanly possible. If not, know that it is in. Never guarantee for an entity you do not control. The third cluster is promoter mortality, incapacity, and succession failure. For this, preventive measures would be a valid, professionally drafted, registered will for every adult family member with assets, refreshed every 3 years or any life event, mirror wills for the promoter couple, a letter of wishes for anything the will should not say in public, advance directives and enduring powers of attorney covering incapacity, including a written objective incapacity trigger so that the family never has to argue about whether it has occurred, a holding company or trust layer so that the ownership passes as a unit rather than fragmenting it into individual shareholdings, a shareholders agreement or a family constitution containing pre-agreed transfer restrictions, rights or first refusals within the family, valuation methodology and a deadlock mechanism, key man insurance sized to the actual refinancing and stabilizing cost, not to a round number, a written asset register, one document updated annually listing every account, holding, policy, property, advisor, and where the originals are, held by two people who are not both on the same aeroplane. Company side, a board approved emergency succession plan, a genuine second line, the delegation of authority that does not route everything through one signature. Cluster 4 is catastrophic field failure and factory disaster. For preventive measures, have full lot traceability tested by an actual mock recall once a year, contractual liability caps, and consequential loss exclusions as standing negotiation positions, insurance reviewed annually against reinstatement value with a business interruption indemnity period matched to the realistic rebuild time for long lead equipment, product liability and recall cover, Public Liability Insurance Act 1991 compliance where applicable, a retained independent failure analysis firm. You do not want to be selecting one during the crisis. Statistical process control with a failure rate trend reporting to the board quarterly, not to the plant head monthly. Second source or second site qualification for the highest margin product line planned over years. Cluster 5 is allegations and reputation shock, where it could involve false allegations, criminal allegations involving a family member, deep fake or short seller anonymous research. A preventive measure would be a dual channel verification rule for every payment or instruction above a threshold, call back on a pre registered number, never on a number supplied in the request. This one control neutralizes most of the D5's financial impact and costs nothing. Media and social monitoring for the family names, company name, and the key brands. A one page crisis communications protocol who speaks, who approves, what the family holding statement says, how fast. Social media hygiene for the whole family, including the second generation, with a written understanding rather than an instruction. Retained defamation counsel, a pre drafted holding statement template, and the difference between a good and bad first response is usually 2 hours, and 2 hours is exactly what a template buys. Governance quality as the underlying defense. R5 attacks land where there is something to find. Cluster 6 is governance and accounting failure. Let's say there is accounting fraud or RPT controversy or auditor resignation. Over here, the preventive measures would be independent directors with genuine sectoral or financial expertise and a temperament to be difficult, internal audit with a direct private reporting line, and at least one in camera session per year with the audit committee without management present, audit committee that commissions its own work, a whistleblower channel run by a third party with anonymity that is real, annual forensic style review of revenue recognition, inventory and RPTs, rotation of finance staff in sensitive roles, the promoter personally understanding the 3 or 4 judgment calls that determine the reported profit, the uncomfortable point, a promoter who cannot name the specific accounting judgments that most affect his reported EBITDA is not in a position to detect their manipulation. And cluster 7, matrimonial breakdown. The preventive measures the preventive measures would be, we see part 4 in full, and we are not there yet. The summary is documentation, not devices. Clear, contemporaneous records of source of funds for every significant acquisition. Inherited and ancestral property kept separate and never commingled. Promoter shares held in a structure with transfer restrictions that apply to everyone equally. Established for succession reasons long before any marriage. A family constitution stating the family's position on entry, exit, and valuation, communicated openly to prospective spouses before marriage rather than produced during a dispute. Prenup and post-nup agreements where the parties may live abroad, drafted under the law where they will actually be, with clear-eyed understanding of the Indian enforceability limits set out in Part 4. Fair, generous, independently advised provision for a spouse is not merely ethical. It is most effective risk mitigation available because most catastrophic matrimonial outcomes are driven by a sense of having been treated unjustly. This is a long section. Damn, it's been 45 minutes already. Certainly doesn't feel like it, so that's a good thing. There is a response register where the remaining 57 scenarios are compressed to 4 fields that actually drive outcomes. Again, this is a massive table, I'm not going to read it. But it involves government, corporate, family, and all the things I said before. Okay, I think I'm going to read it out. Okay, for government and regulatory, this one is important. Field failure data, utility vendor list review cycles, and certification expiry. So the key preventive measure would be certification calendar owned at board level, over engineer margin on type tests, and multiple approvals across utilities. The recovery anchor is requalification program, which assumes 2 to 4 years. The first move in the first 72 hours would be technical response team, customer engagement at engineering level. For corporate, for every fundraise proposal, ESOP pool expansion, or convertible issuances, model post money promoters take before approving any issuance as a standing board discipline, where you need to recalculate control position and assess alternatives to equity. Okay. In family, there is where the next generation actually chooses to live. So build the professional management layer now. Design ownership that works with absentee owners, where the recovery anchor is board governed, professionally managed, family owned model. Local pattern as part of crime and security. There is local pattern, staff turnover, and contracted access, where the preventive measure is layered residential security, staff vetting and revetting, discrete valuable storage. The recovery anchor would be security upgrade and staff free vetting. And there is lifestyle inconsistent with salary, resistance to leave or rotation, single person control of a process. So it's important to have background verification at hiring and periodically, mandatory leave, segregation of duties, and access review. In the first move would be suspending access before confronting. The recovery anchor would be control redesign. The control gap matters more than the individual. For vendor bank detail change requests, urgency and secrecy in payment emails. This happened. Had we done this before, we wouldn't have gone through this. The key preventive measure is a dual channel callback verification on a pre registered number for every bank detail change and every payment above a threshold. Okay, we are done with part 3 as well. We are at part 4, and now I'm curious how many parts there are. Part 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 parts. We are 30% done only. Okay. I'm tired, but I think I can go through. But I'm hungry as well. Okay, damn, okay. This gets me a bit of re-interested. Part 4 is single points of failure. This is the most important part of the document. Everything before it is a list. This is the analysis that tells you which item on the list are load bearing. The core distinction: wealth diversification versus risk diversification. Wealth diversification is spread the rupees across labels: equity, real estate, fixed deposits, golds and bonds. And the diversification is spread exposure across causes of losses. They are routinely confused and the confusion is expensive. Consider a typical diversified Indian promoter balance sheet, where the promoter shares in the listed company is equity. Commercial property in the same city is real estate. Fixed deposits at the company's lead bank is cash. Portfolio of Indian mutual funds is equity or debt, and gold is a commodity. Five labels on inspection: one currency, one legal system, one enforcement jurisdiction, one political environment, one banking system, and a heavy shared dependence on health of the Indian industry. The family has diversified its wealth and has barely diversified its risk at all. In a genuine systematic event, capital controls, INR crisis, coercive state action against the family, a domestic banking disruption, 4 to 5 move together. The 9 dimensions of genuine diversification. For every significant holding, ask which of these it differs on. Anything sharing 7 or more dimensions with another holding is for resilience purposes, the same asset wearing a different label. The first is asset class, then there is currency, then there is jurisdiction of situs where the asset physically or legally sits, then there is legal system governing it, which is courts, which enforcement, which speed, and there is counterparty, which is the bank or broker or insurance or custodian. Then there is the custodian and access route who physically controls access and can they be compelled. Then there is liquidity horizon, same day, 1 week, 1 quarter, 1 year, never. Cause of loss, which is the actual driver of impairment. And lastly, the legal owner, which natural person or entity holds the title, what can reach through it. Dimension 9 is the one that families forget, and it is the one that turns a diversified portfolio into a concentrated one. If a single individual owns everything, then every risk attaching to that individual, guarantee, matrimonial tax, criminal, mortality reaches every asset simultaneously. Ownership diversification across natural persons and legitimate entities is not a tax structure. It is a correlation breaking structure, and that is completely different than entirely legitimate purpose. The correlation that nobody lists is the largest undiversified exposure in a promoter family is not on the balance sheet at all. It's the promoter's human capital, his income, his professional identity, his net worth, his social standing, his sense of purpose, and his family's future options. All are a levered bet on the same single company. When the company falls, the family loses money and status and identity and network and often the capacity to think clearly about what to do next. This is why crisis decision making in promoter families is so consistently poor. The people making the decisions are the people whose entire selves are the position being liquidated. The structural answer is to ensure at least one adult family member has an economic and professional base independent of the company. It is the cheapest correlation breaker available. It is almost never designed for deliberately. Now let's talk about the detonation chains. A detonation chain is a sequence where one event mechanically triggers the next without any further bad luck. These are not scenarios, they are wiring. For example, chain 1, the guarantee chain. Yours or extended. First, business stress, which leads to convenient breach, which leads to lender accelerates, which leads to company cannot pay, which leads to guarantee invoked. NCLT admission now near automatic within 14 days, so no interim moratorium for a personal guarantor. Personal assets in play. Family residence in the security package. Spouse is a co-op obligator, so her assets are in play too. Family liquidity gone, which leads to legal fees required at exactly the moment income stopped. Then there is the bankruptcy order, which leads to director disqualification, which means you cannot legally run the rescue, which means the shares must be sold in a distressed market. So, control may be lost permanently. All these things started with only the business stress. So, what happened was a commercial problem became a personal liberty adjacent, matrimonial control and succession problem through a single document signed years earlier, probably in 10 minutes, probably without negotiation. The breakpoints are the cap, the guarantee, remove the spouse, keep the residents out, maintain liquidity outside the company, negotiate release triggers at every refinancing. Now, this one particularly does not apply to us because I had it confirmed that we haven't given any personal guarantees. The next one, chain 2, is the concentration chain. This one would be interesting because this one does apply. 90% of wealth in one listed holding. Company prices. Price falls 80%. Dividend stops, which leads to the family's entire income stop in the same quarter as its wealth halves, which leads to borrowing capacity against shares collapses, and then any existing pledge hits margin, which leads to more shares pledged or invoked, which leads to disclosure of increased pledging under LODR registration 31 or SAST registration 31, which signals distress, which leads to price falling further, which leads to a reflexive loop, which leads to a forced sale at the bottom, which leads to again control lost. The reflexivity in this the point. Pledging is the mechanism that converts a price decline into a control loss, and the disclosure requirement means the market watches it happen. The breakpoints are that never pledge promoters' shares for personal purposes. Maintain diversified assets that hold value when the company does not. maintain a non-company income. Then the chain 3 is the investigation chain. Okay. In this, there is one event, three chains, six systems, all within about 90 days. This is the scenario this entire architecture exists to survive. So first there is any coercive state action which leads to bank account being frozen or attached, which leads to salary or statutory dues unpaid within one cycle, which leads to vendor stop supply, which leads to production halts, which leads to delivery missed, which leads to LDs, which leads to convenient breach, which leads to guarantee when we rejoin the chain of one. And then we have simultaneously institutional shareholders exist, which leads to pricing fall, which leads to pledge margins where we rejoin chain 2, and then simultaneously lenders decline renewals, and then the passport is restricted, and then you cannot attend foreign customer meetings that would have saved the order book. The breakpoints are liquidity outside the primary banking group, multiple banking relationships, a management layer that functions without the promoter and no pledges. Chain 4 is the single node chain. The MD is simultaneously the strategic decision maker, the top customer relationship, the bank relationship, the personal guarantor, the credit standing, the controlling shareholder, the family arbitrator, and the only person who knows where the documents are. And anything happening to him removes 8 things at once. The company would lose direction. The customers lose their counterpart. The banks lose their credit story and invoke key person clauses. The family loses its referee at the exact moment it must divide an estate, and nobody can find that fucking will. The breakpoints, relationship handover to named deputies, a documented asset registered held by 2 people, a board approved emergency succession plan, and the family constitution as a substitute arbiter. Chain 5, single bank chain. One institution holds the term loan, the working capital, the promoter's personal accounts, the family's investments, the guarantee, the possibility of the demat account, possibly the demat account, and a single compliance flag, dispute, or relationship breakdown at the bank, with sets of rights exercised against the personal deposits, operating accounts constrained, and the family emergency liquidity is sitting inside the counterparty it needs protection from. The breakpoint is that the family's emergency liquidity must never be at an institution that has a claim on the family or the company. This is a one afternoon fix and almost nobody does it. Then there is the family residence chain. The family home is frequently simultaneously A. collateral for company borrowing, B. the shared household for the purpose of protection of women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, and C. an ancestral or HUF asset with an unclear character, and D. the residence of 3 generations, and E. the single largest non-company asset. Therefore, a guarantee invocation or a matrimonial dispute or an inheritance dispute or an HUF partition claim, 4 completely unrelated events, all converge on the same physical building in which the family lives. Breakpoints: get it out of the security package. Document its character and source of funds now. Ensure at least one alternative residence exists and that is clean for all 4 claims. Chain 7, the governance signal chain. RPT question raised. Auditor seeks additional representations, which leads to qualification or resignation, which leads to ADT3 filled and public within days, which leads to LODR registration 30 disclosure, which leads to lenders commence review, which leads to convene and test fails, which leads to refinancing declines, which leads to guarantee and independent directors resign, which is itself a further public signal, which leads to institutional exit and price fall and the pledge margin. Chain 8, the single site chain. Fire or closure direction at any plant, which leads to production stopping, which leads to LD accrue and PBGs are encashed, which leads to customers qualify a competitor, and in this sector, requalification for your replacement is a 2-year process and the customer will not reverse quickly, which leads to revenue does not return when production does, insurance dispute over BI indemnity period, which leads to convenient breach and again the guarantee. The breakpoint. The second site is expensive and is the only real answer. Interim contract manufacturing fallback qualified in advance for the top product line. Yes, this is important. Note. In interim, there should be a contract manufacturing fallback qualified in advance for the top product line. Chain 9, the advisor chain. One firm is the company's auditor's affiliate, the family's tax advisor, the trust account, and the second family business is consultant and the hold the original documents. Their error propagates to every entity simultaneously. Their conflict of interest is invisible. Their disqualification or investigation reaches everything, and a single search of their office captures the family's entire documentary history. The breakpoint is deliberately separate advisors for the listed company, the family, and the trust. Originals held by the family and not the advisor. Chain 10, the next generation chain. A second generation member works in the company, aka me, is a shareholder or prospective heir and marries into another business family. I'm still single. His matrimonial dispute becomes simultaneously an ownership dispute for his shares, a management dispute for his roles, a commercial dispute if the two families trade, and a family governance crisis whose side the parents takes. 4 systems and 1 marriage. I need to break up with my girlfriend. Breakpoint. Separate the roles explicitly and in writing. Employment terms, shareholding terms, family membership are 3 different things governed by 3 different documents. Part 6 covers the rest. Chain 11, the second business chain. A separate family owned business trades with, leases from, and is funded by the listed company. It is simultaneously a related party. A reputational surface and a creditor contagion route, and if governance is informal, the most likely origin of a G5 or C7 event. Its problems are not contained, they are arbitrated to the promoter. Breakpoint. Either transact at documented arm's length with the full process or do not transact at all. There is no comfortable middle. There are a lot more chains than I had expected. Chain 12, the information chain. Okay, one compromised mailbox which leads to payment fraud, which leads to leak of financial and personal data, which leads to exposure of unpublished price sensitive information, which leads to a reportable personal data breach under the DPDP framework, with penalties reaching 250 crores per instance of for failure to take reasonable security safeguards plus material for a subsequent deepfake. One technical failure, five distinct legal and reputational exposures. The breakpoint, MFA, mailbox segregation. The cost is negligible, and this is the highest return on effort item in this entire document. Then the mobility chain. Lookout circular or passport impounding, which means you cannot attend international customer audit, trade fairs, or supplier qualifications, which leads to export segment degrades over 12 to 24 months, and simultaneously cannot physically reach any foreign assets account or residences the family established for exactly this contingency. The breakpoint is foreign structures must be operable remotely and by more than one person, and the foreign account only the promoter can access is not a hedge against the promoter being restricted. Finally, the last chain, chain 14, the insurance aggregation chain. The breakpoint is to have an independent annual insurance audit by a firm that does not place the real business. Okay, so if you're reading the master matrix for correlation, the general finding is that the risk that threatens the family system are family, legal, and reputational. The risks that dominate management attention are commercial, and the gap between these two sentences is the reason this documentation exists. Part 5, the main thing, the resilience architecture. Okay, this is another long read. I think this is the main part as it is. So I'm gonna take a quick break now, and then I'll either make a second video or put them together. Most likely make a second video, that's easier. Anyways, it's 1 hour 20 minutes. That's longer than any of my study sessions that I remember in the last year at least.